Here in recent weeks on Mark Rogers TV, we have gone through the conferences, ranking the top 5 at each position. Also have gotten into a coaches discussion, ranking the top coaches and going 1 through whatever in that particular conference. We did so in the SEC. Didn't have a chance to get Mike Loveall of Last Word on Sports on board for that discussion and really missed the insight. So we gained a little bit of that on Twitter, Mike. So thanks so much for joining us to provide us with your insight and your college football rankings in the SEC at the coaching spot.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. So for my rankings of coaches in the SEC, here's the criteria I looked at. 1, historical success, their body of work. 2, recruiting, because recruiting is such an integral part of coaching in college football these days. You know, the high school kids are essentially free agents, so you got to get the talent into the program. 3, coaching. Once you get that talent into the program, you got to coach the kids up. You got to get the most out of your talent. 4, running the program. A college head coach is a general manager. He's a fundraiser. He's a PR guy on top of coaching the kids up and managing his staff. But number 5, my most important criteria is this. If I am an athletic director and I have to hire a coach today, which one of these coaches would I hire? So that was kind of my tiebreaker. So those are my criteria, and here's my 14 coaches. I'll start at 14. I kind of got them broken down into 3 groups. The first group is too soon to tell. So number 14, I got Derek Mason out of Vanderbilt. He just looked a little bit overmatched last year. I think he's a great guy. He's probably a great I know he's a great defensive coach. Not sure that he's learned how to be a head coach at the Power 5 level yet. Played through 4 quarterbacks. They lost to Temple by about 30 points, I believe, first game of the season. A significant downturn from the James Franklin years, and he's appointed himself as defensive coordinator this year. So we'll see how that works. They do return the second most amount of starters in the conference, so they might see a little bit of improvement, but he just kind of looks a little bit in over his head there at Vanderbilt. Number 13, I have Jim McElwain. Some decent success at Colorado State, but still yet to be proven as a head coach at the Power 5 level. And then number 12, Mark Stoops. He's brought in some talent to Kentucky. They started out 5-0 last year. They were kind of robbed of a victory there at Florida, which would have made them 6-0 after Florida kicks a field goal after the play clock had expired. So I got Derek Mason at 14, Jim McElwain at 13, and Mark Stoops there at number 12. I think Mark Stoops and Jim McElwain have potential to move up on the list. McElwain probably more so than Stoops just because he's at Florida. Not sure. I don't think it's looking too good for Derek Mason. That's a hard road to hoe there at Vanderbilt. So my second grouping was up and coming, and all these guys are 50 and below except for one guy. And I'll be honest with you, but from rank number 5 to rank number 11, you can probably order these guys any which way, and you're probably going to be good. You can make a legitimate argument for that. So at number 11, this is probably going to be the most controversial pick. I have Hugh Freeze. He's 45 years old. I think he's an overrated coach. I like to call him the Robert Johnson college football coaches. If you're familiar with the Robert Johnson story, then you know what that means. A little bit of early hype last year. One of the things I look at with head coaches with their ability to coach their team is the late season performance. Ole Miss has had a couple of late season collapses. Their bowl performance last year was terrible. It was Charles Barkley terrible. It was that bad. I think with the defense that team last year, the defense that team had last year, they should have been much more competitive. I know they had a couple key injuries, but their late season performance I thought was not very good. At number 10, I have Kevin Sumlin. He's 50 years old. He's 4-1 in bowls. That's a key stat. But he did inherit some great talent. He is 28 and 11 in the SEC, about a 3-1 SEC record. So I think there's some. I think he has potential to move up, particularly with John Chavis coming in as defensive coordinator. I have Butch Jones at number 9. He's 47 years old. Great recruiter. He is building that program at Tennessee. I don't think nationally, I don't think people understand the state that the Tennessee program was in after the 4 years of Kiffin and Dooley. The way he's been able to turn around the whole program, not just the performance on the field, but the whole program. We had some NCAA issues. We had some discipline issues. We had some academic issues. So he's been able to turn the whole program around. He's got us to move up on this list. We got to start translating that into wins on the field, though. But I think he's one of 2 or 3 coaches in this middle group that has the highest trajectory. At number 8, Bret Bielema. A lot of people see Arkansas and Tennessee kind of the same, and Bielema and Jones kind of the same boat. What breaks the tie for Bielema is his past success at Wisconsin. Arkansas was also in shambles after the Petrino, John L. Smith fiasco, kind of similar to the whole Kiffin Dooley thing in Tennessee. So he's done a really good job of changing that program. He's completely put his identity on that program. The 5 offensive linemen on the programs, bringing the offensive linemen in media days, just his kind of big offensive lineman mentality coming in there, running the ball. I love they have 2,000-yard rushers. So I think Bret Bielema, again, this shows you how good the coaches are in the SEC when Bielema is number 8. He's a really good coach. At number 7, I've got Gus Malzahn. He's 49. Clearly, he's an offensive genius. The knock on him is he's 0-2 in bowls, and like I said, when I evaluate coaches, that late season is really where coaching really makes a difference, I think. I think it's a little bit too early to elevate him to the top tier. He just doesn't have the depth of resume. Even for 49 years of age, most of his time is spent at the high school level. I know he took a team to the national championship game a couple years ago. I still think he needs a little bit more depth of resume. At number 6, the one outlier in this group is Les Miles. He's not really the up-and-coming guy. He's 61. He does have a national championship to his name. That national championship team was a 2-loss team. Here's what he's got 2 SEC titles as well. Here's the big knock for me on Les Miles. Here are his 2 defensive coordinators for the years he's been successful, Bo Pelini and John Chavis. So I really call him the Trent Dilfer of college football coaches. I don't think that you can attribute greatness to him just because he won a national championship. I don't devalue the national championship. To win a national championship as a coach is very important, but I don't think he's one of the top 4 just because he has a national championship. The one year that he didn't have Pelini or Chavis as a defensive coordinator was he went 8-5, kind of a mediocre year. The other knock on Les Miles for me is that 2011 team. That was probably the best college football team I've ever seen talent-wise, and they ruined it in the championship game. I think if they would have beat Alabama in the championship game, that would have been – I think you would have had to have considered that team one of the top 5 greatest teams ever, and they completely blew it in the national championship game against Alabama. All right, so back to the up-and-coming. Number 5, I have Dan Mullen. Now, I'm not going to sit here and throw out a whole bunch of stats because I don't really think there are a whole bunch of stats. I like what he did at Florida. If you look what's happened at Florida since he left in 2008, 2009, they haven't really been the same offensively. A lot of that has to do with Muschamp, but Dan Mullen had a lot to do with that. And I can't really throw you a lot of stats what he's done at Mississippi State. To me, he just passes the eye test. He's managing that program. Let's be honest, Starkville doesn't have a lot of resources. He's building that into a national program. I just like the way he's gone about it. I will say, going back to Les Miles, I do like the guy, and I do appreciate the fact that he spends a lot less time in the office than a lot of other coaches, except for Spurrier. I do like that work-life balance, but I just don't think that elevates him higher. So I like Dan Mullen. I think he passes the eye test for me. If I were starting a program today, he'd be a guy I really look hard at. So that's kind of my 5 through 11, my up-and-coming. All those guys are 50 and below except for Miles. Okay, so now my tier 1, my proven coaches. At number 4, I have Mark Richt, and I think, and I saw your podcast with Chad and David. I think Mark Richt is the most underappreciated coach in the SEC, which I think is probably a little bit opposite from you. He's 136-40. He's got 136 wins in the SEC. Has 2 conference championships, 6 Eastern Division championships, and he's 9-5 in bowls. He has almost a 2-to-1 bowl winning ratio. That's pretty good. Of course, the knock on there is he can't win the home run. He can't ever win the national championship. He's always 10-3 or 9-3. When you're coming from a program that would like to be 9-3 or 10-3 every year, you appreciate that. Of course, Georgia fans are getting kind of restless, but I think Mark Richt is a quality coach. If you look at the Georgia program, it's a solid program, constantly moving. You have something like the Todd Gurley issue, and it doesn't derail the program. That's the sign of a good program manager right there. The Georgia program kind of moves on its own. It's more than the coach or more than one player. I think Mark Richt is a quality coach because he manages that program so well. Gary Pinkel at number 3, 185 wins in college football. 2 consecutive SEC East championships, and I don't think there's anybody. So I think Les Miles does less with more than anyone. I don't think there's anybody who does more with less than Gary Pinkel. Missouri, not a huge hotbed for recruiting, doesn't get a lot of 5-star talent, doesn't get a lot of top recruiting classes, but still churns out 2 SEC East championships in a row after his success in the Big 12. Hey, and let's be honest, moving from conference to conference is not easy. He managed that transition really well, particularly from Missouri moving into the SEC East. So they have a lot of travel, a lot of teams they play that they're not too familiar with. Number 2, Steve Spurrier. I got it. He's 70 years old, but he's got over 200 SEC wins. Okay, so here's the list of 200-plus SEC wins. Bear Bryant, Vince Dooley, and Steve Spurrier. Okay, so, I mean, he's got to be on that list. He's got to be the top tier. When you're on the list with Vince Dooley and Bear Bryant, I mean, you're a really good coach. You're one of the all-time greats. So that kind of does it for me. He's got two national championships, or one national championship, and 6 SEC championships. Of course, the knock on him is his performance at South Carolina, and, of course, his age. But, again, 200 SEC wins, that's just incredible. And then number 1, I think this is probably consensus around the nation, or at least for the SEC. Nick Saban, 63 years old, 4 national championships at 2 schools. Look at what he did with Michigan State, kind of brought that program back to national prominence, went to LSU, did the same thing there. Under his leadership at LSU, they had their first back-to-back 10-win seasons in the history of the program, and brought him a first national championship since the 60s. The one knock on Nick Saban is he is 8-8 in bowls, and sometimes that Alabama team has had 1 or 2 letdown performances in the Sugar Bowl after not making it to the national championship game. So, Mark, those are my top coaches, coaching rankings in the SEC, 14-1. I saw you and Chad and David, so I know there might be some consternation there, maybe with Steve Spurrier, Mark Richt, and Hugh Freeze in particular.
Yeah, those would be the ones in particular that we differed on, and also some of our rankings with yours. I'll steer people toward that video, again, with myself, Chad Niebling, and David Waters, talking about top 14 coaches, so I'm not going to go through my complete spiel here, but Nick Saban's number 1. I think it's amazing that he went to LSU, and we look at LSU now, we should revert back to the LSU of 2000. They were a 500 program throughout the 90s, and he turned around LSU. We look at Alabama, and again, it's going to be a different narrative once Saban leaves and leaves the riches to somebody else, and they win at Alabama. He took over a different Alabama, and he turned that back into a national power. I think Saban's resume speaks for itself. It's very easy to defend. I had Gary Pinkel at number 2, considering the issues that he has in recruiting base there in Missouri, stepping into the SEC, being somewhat overwhelmed that first year and being able to spin it on a dime, and suddenly, completely surprisingly, competing and winning 2 division championships after that. Again, I'm not going to go through my complete commentary 1 through 14. Hugh Freeze, I think, if you look at where Ole Miss was when he took over the program, a 2-10 team, and he's built it step by step, brick by brick, in bringing it to a place of SEC prominence, 9-3 last season before the debacle in the bowl game. I don't think that there's enough of a track record to see where there's a letdown at the end of the season. He did win the previous 2 bowl games of less significance, but they did really embarrass themselves on a national stage against TCU, but that's one game. I'm not going to lay a whole lot on that. The Mark Richt discussion is probably the most interesting one here, because if you were to ask me at the beginning of any college football season to stake my mortgage on a particular team or program winning, let's say, 8 games, Georgia might be the first team I turn to. So he is so consistent, winning 9 and 10 games. I saw somebody throw out a number of people on a message board the other day, 8-4 Georgia. You can guarantee Mark Richt's going to go 8-4, and they said that in a derogatory vein. And I said, when has Mark Richt gone 8-4? It's been 10 wins per year, and it's been a few past that. He was the unfortunate coach to be standing on the sideline with his team 4 yards away from a national championship game. He needed either one more play, 1 more second on the clock, or 4 more yards to get his team to what most assuredly would have been a win over Notre Dame to win that elusive national championship. And me, like you, really cringes when I see top lists of coaches or quarterbacks and they're tied instantly just to championships. So the guy that wins 3 championships is automatically better than the guy that wins 2, or the guy that wins 1 is automatically better than the guy that wins none. I think that's a very thin and shallow analysis of the situation. So Mark Richt has done an outstanding job at Georgia, but I was racking my brain to come up with a time when Mark Richt overachieved. In terms of the entirety of the season and also in any particular game. So it appears as though, if you go season to season, that Mark Richt typically loses 1 or 2 games every year that he shouldn't lose, or he has the better talent base, but he never upsets anyone or pulls off a significant upset. And that's what I would hold against Mark Richt. I think if we were looking at character, class, and integrity, he would be at the top of this list, and I think that means a whole bunch. I know for fans it comes down to wins and losses and championships, and they don't care how it gets done, but I think there's stability and there's prestige in doing it the right way and putting on the face of a program. And much kudos go to Butch Jones and what he has started there at Tennessee, and you really bring into focus a number of things that he's been able to do there that get unnoticed by the typical fan, and Mark Richt has done that for years at Georgia. Again, I won't go through the whole thing. I know Steve Spurrier's a point of contention as well. I was looking at it, and I had Spurrier ranked all the way down at number 7, so I was not looking at legacy and prominence of legacy. I was basically ranking these coaches and what would be the pecking order in which I would hire them today. So maybe I'm putting a little bit too much on what appears to be the trajectory of the South Carolina program. They're only 1 year removed from having a 3-year run of finishing in the top 10 and winning double-digit games. Yes, it appears based on last season's 7-6 and based on recruiting rankings that the slide has started there at South Carolina, and they've missed their window to get to the SEC championship game and win it. There at South Carolina. So my thoughts, Mike, I appreciate how you've put things in perspective in a number of areas in which don't necessarily typically get brought into the forum.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quality of coaching in the SEC is tremendous when you have Mark Stoops, Jim McElwain, and Derek Mason, 11 or 12, 13, and 14. I think all 14 coaches are quality coaches.
Yeah, consider what Mark Stoops has done. He's taken over a program that traditionally does not win, was in bad shape. He's recruited top 20 classes back-to-back years. He got within a bad call, most would consider, from getting to a bowl game last year. Mark Stoops has done an outstanding job to get started there at Kentucky. With Hugh Freeze and with Dan Mullen, I want to see sustained winning. They have improved those programs. Mullen's done it in a longer period of time and really sustained Mississippi State as a team that's going to win 7 games, usually go 3-5 or 4-4 in the conference, and then they're going to get to a bowl game and usually show up and play pretty well against a lesser Power 5 team. This was a breakthrough season for them in 2014. Can they sustain that and play with the big boys in the SEC West? For Hugh Freeze, it's been a step-by-step process, but like we've talked about with Butch Jones, it's one thing to go from disaster to 5 wins to 7. Then when you're talking about the SEC and getting from 7 to, say, 9 or 10 wins, you're talking about beating some really significant players on the national landscape, beating top 15 teams to be able to do that. So that's the next step for a number of coaches in this league. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Mike Loveall of Last Word on Sports. If you really want to dig into some insightful perspective on college football, more than just the surfacey stuff, check out Mike on Last Word on Sports, and some of his work there. Mike, again, it's been fun breaking this down.
Great. Thanks for having me, Mark.